welcome to a midweek follow-up where we talk about this past Sunday's message, maybe discuss the readings, discuss any questions that arose from the sermon, but just continue the conversation so that we're not people who engage with it one day a week, but are really meditating on it and digesting it and internalizing it and focusing on it and spending our time with it throughout the week as well. So this past Sunday, 2 Corinthians 4, 1-15, incredible passage. Really just some beautiful truths about our eternal identity and how that affects our earthly temporary roles. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on the message? Any questions?
I just liked the passage a lot. I think it was a great passage to preach on, that you preached on. But I do like the emphasis of the eternal role, like how the eternal role, like, influences the earthly temporary roles. And you mentioned servants and vessels, and you kind of unpacked that. So I just thought it was great. I thought it was greatly unpacked. And it was filled with, I would say it was filled with grace and compassion and like the heart of, all right, this is what we need to be filled with, Christ's heart for people.
Yeah.
And I think that was just a great point. Like, I don't know, because we could fill ourselves with a bunch of stuff and say, oh, this is like Christian stuff.
Yeah.
This is like, I don't know. But it could also not, like, we could pour it out in such a way that it's not beneficial for the brother or sister in Christ, you know?
Yeah, like the Bible says, speak the truth in love.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The famous, not a marriage passage, but totally used at marriage, like at weddings, right? Like, love is patient, love is kind, and that's directly related to, you know, if I speak with all of human eloquence or the eloquence of angels, if I do all this, but I don't have love, I'm nothing.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's a, you know, we spent a good bit of time looking at verse 2, right? We don't practice cunning. We don't practice underhanded ways. And that word there, like we don't tamper with. Where it says we don't tamper with the gospel. That word was a word used to describe wine merchants who would like secretly water down their wares before selling it to people, right? So it's not just tampering, it's cheating. It's cheating the person you're sharing it with. Now in their case, like selling it to, right, the merchants.
Yeah, but the picture is there.
Tampering with the gospel, like if I tamper with the gospel, thinking I'm helping you, I'm actually robbing you.
Yeah.
And I'm cheating you. And I'm being dishonest. I'm not being thoughtful. I'm not being considerate.
Yeah.
I'm being a liar.
Yeah.
And
because you're not giving the gospel.
Right. So yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah.
And you have to talk about that because to not talk about it would be to tamper with the gospel. You know, well, hey, we're going to jump from verse 1 to verse 4. Like, we're just going to skip those two verses because it makes people uncomfortable. So we talk about it because to not talk about it would be to tamper with the gospel. But like you just said, it always has to be tempered, right, with that love, that compassion of Christ. And I think that's one of the mistakes we make thinking about God. We think of God as like a seesaw, right, where, okay, in order for him to be more graceful right now, he has to be less truth requiring. I'm raising my arms too high. But like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, well, right now God's being kind. Yeah. Which means he's not being just. Like, you know, God's not a seesaw. Yeah. God is always 100% kind and 100% just. Yeah. He is always 100% graceful and always 100% like, this is the truth, don't change it. Like, God doesn't have levels that are trying to add up to 100. Everything is always at 100. Yeah. And so we need to be always 100%. This is the gospel. We're not going to apologize for it. We're not going to change it. We're not going to shrink from it. We're also going to always be graceful and merciful and kind and compassionate and firm and bold and courageous. And, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like one Jesus flipped the tables and cleansed the temples and another Jesus, like, prevented the crowd from stoning the woman. Yeah. Like, same Jesus. One Jesus. You know what I mean? And so we can't be, well, okay, this week will be the church that's cleansing the temple. This week will be the church that's nice to people. Like,
or even just like, I choose to be just always
Yeah, right. Yeah,
this
yeah, yeah.
particular thing.
That's the part of Jesus that resonates with me. So that's
Yeah.
the part that I choose to emulate.
Yeah.
Like, no, it's an all.
Yep.
It's an everything.
Same person, same
Yep.
heart.
And
Yeah.
so yeah, I think that emphasis of love in the heart of Christ is really important, because the heart of Christ is for truth, and the heart of Christ is for compassion.
Yeah.
The heart of Christ is for justice, and the heart of Christ is for mercy. Like,
Yeah.
so if our focus is, okay, am I fairly, truthfully, honestly reflecting the entire heart of Christ, then that'll guard against that
Yeah.
leveling.
That's true. That's good. Yeah, I thought it was good. I thought your example with the vase.
Yeah.
That was
I don't
pretty.
normally do
I
that.
think you scared some people.
Oh, there were a lot of gasps. there were a lot of gasps. There were a lot of shocked faces. Like, people absolutely thought, oh my goodness, he's about to pour a whole pitcher out on the stage.
and ruin all of the worship equipment.
Like, yeah, people definitely thought that
was completely filled.
That was completely
But
filled.
you played it well, so that's why they were convinced.
I
Because you literally said when you were like, "Oh, gotta be careful here."
Yep. I honestly, I think that's the first time I've ever used
Like an illustrative,
like a
object.
physical illustrative object.
Yeah.
And I wasn't planning on it. Like, that was not in my plan whatsoever. When I got there the morning, like, I was going to give a verbal description of it. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, I was going to still use the illustration of like an empty jar can't, like an empty vase can't pour anything out. But then Sarah Wilson had actually brought that in that morning.
Oh, really?
To give to somebody. And so it was sitting on the stage, like right by the
the Lord just
pulpit.
he's
And I
like-
was like, hey, could I use that for the sermon? Like, I was going to tell us, like, I was going to paint a word picture, but now I don't have, like, now I can
Now
just,
you can do an object lesson.
now I can do an object lesson. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think that was the first object lesson I've ever done.
It was a good. There's a reason why object lessons work for kids.
Yeah.
Because it really does give a good picture, and
Yeah.
I thought it did. But anyways, that was my thoughts on the sermon. I think those two identities, which I do think that, like, and maybe we could talk about. Maybe I can ask you this.
Yeah.
Okay, identity.
Sure.
I mean, that is a huge. It is a huge thing our culture is talking about. It's a huge thing in Christianity, and what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Like, he gives us a new identity.
Yeah.
Now, when we think of identity, I don't think we think vessel. I don't think we think servant. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit more. Like, what does it mean, like, as my identity to be a vessel? And like does that mean that God just wants to use me as like a, and doesn't care about like my personality or my, I don't know, my thoughts
Yeah.
with things like that.
So are we just supposed to be this, like, uniform, faceless?
Yeah, are we basically simply objects in the hands of the Father, or are we something else? Which
Yes.
I have my answer, but I'm curious of you.
Okay, so you
of
asked,
your
are
answer.
we A or B? And I say yes, which I've done a couple times to you.
Yeah.
Yes, we are objects in the hands of the Father. Mm-hmm. Why is that a bad thing?
Yeah.
Like, that's only a bad thing because we have allowed culture to dictate to us that the individual is the supreme authority. And so the idea of me not being the supreme authority and being the idea of me saying, yeah, I'm an object to be used by God. Like, I'm a vessel to be filled by the Lord, used for his holy purpose. What did Timothy say, right? The master of the house chooses the vessels to use.
Yeah.
And that's what the vessel does.
Yeah.
So yes, that's who I am. And that's not a bad thing. When we think it's a bad thing, it's because that reveals that we've allowed cultural standards of individual sovereignty and individual idolatry and self-worship
Yeah.
to influence our thinking. There is no greater honor for me
Yeah.
than to be a vessel used by the Lord.
Yeah.
So yes, we are absolutely a vessel to be used by God.
Yeah.
So you said, so are we just a vessel to be used by God, or are we an individual, known with our own personality? And I said, yes, we are absolutely a vessel to be used by God. And yes, we are an individual known by God, crafted by God, with a personality, with a temperament, with a passion, with a zeal. I mean, you cannot read through the New Testament without coming across just numerous accounts of, as each of you has been gifted differently. The different body parts all have a different function. Like, you've all been assembled together deliberately to complement one another, to bring different strengths to the table. So, no, we're not just a nameless, faceless blob. Like, we are a personality. We are a personality created by God, crafted by God, conformed to the image of Christ.
Yeah.
Called to use the gifting he has given us, which is different from one another. The personality he has given us, the temperament he has given us, different from one another, to edify the body and build it up. Now, that should all be personalities and temperaments and passions under submission to the authority of Christ, and pursuit, in a relentless pursuit of holiness. But it is not an abandonment of uniqueness
Of the person.
It's not an abandonment of the person. It's not an abandonment of uniqueness. I like cooking. I like reading. I like sports. Right? Like, 3 things that I like. I like Legos. I like Christmas. Everyone in our church doesn't have to say, like, well, all right, I guess those are my favorite things now. You know what I mean? Like, because that's Sam's favorite stuff, so I guess we just have to be exactly like, no, right? If you're like, yeah, no, I don't like reading. Okay. Like, you don't have to. Still read the Bible. Like, we're not talking about the Bible here, right? But, like, you know what I mean? Like, no, man, I'm never, like, one of my favorite things to do, one of our family's favorite things to do on a Friday is go to the library, right? Like, almost every Friday we're at the library getting new books, right? Like, just fun books to read, not like, study books, but just like fiction books, right? Like, or historical books. You might be like, no, I'm never going to choose to go to the library and, like, give myself...
On my day off.
Right, like, give myself extra reading.
You
don't have to. Just because I do doesn't mean you don't have to, right? I've used this example before. You might be like, oh, on my day off, I'm going to go stand in a creek for 4 hours and throw a string in the water. Like, dude, I'm not spending my day off fishing. Like, just not doing it.
No.
I don't have to. Just because you like to.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we are vessels to be used by God as he wills. And yes, we are individuals created by God, known by God, designed by God, with varying gifts, with varying passions. And we're not meant to just abandon those.
No. And I think it is like a both and. And the reason why I ask is because, I mean, I don't know how, I think if anyone were a newer believer coming in to learn about these things and they hear your identity is now a vessel, like you are now an object, based on a lot of different experiences, that could be very confusing for people. Like, am I just an object? Like, I was sexually abused when I was someone's, whatever case, whatever, like, my age, like, they only saw me as an object. So am I coming into Christianity now and God just sees me as an object? And so, like, it can be very confusing, I think, if people don't understand, like, well, when God sees you as an object, it's not in the sense of sin.
In the sense exactly. It's like, a holy view.
It is not it is, you are an instrument, is I like the way that Romans puts it. Like, instruments and because it even says that, it has that passage that we read where it says vessels used by the Father, like, cleansed, right? But also in Romans where it says instruments, that word instrument can also be used for weapon. And so, like, we're weapons in the hands of the Father against evil. And I mean, like, hey, I want to be
That's one of the passages we've used so many times in this ecclesia, this church, is, when Jesus says to Peter, like, I will build my church on you and the gates of hell will not stand against it. Like, we are an offensive weapon. Like, we are not a defensive weapon. We are an offensive weapon. And that's cool. Like, who wouldn't want to be that?
It is cool.
You know what I mean? Like, who wouldn't want to be the battering ram wielded by Christ to break down the gates of hell?
I mean, hey, it's like Jesus wants to destroy evil and he wants to use his church to do it. I'm like, that's cool. So yeah, that was the intention behind me asking.
Yeah,
is that's
it's a
why.
good question.
So
And
I
that's
think
the point of these videos, right? To ask those questions that we can't unpack everything in the sermon.
But I think it's important to be a vessel and a servant, and so I think it was great that you unpacked those.
Well, and even that word you just said, servant, right? So what happens? Okay, so we just said that we're individuals with individual passions, individual, taste and stuff. Like, how does that reconcile with being servants? If we're called to be servants of everyone.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, the Bible talks about, like, think of others more highly than you think of yourselves.
Yeah.
And so being a servant is not rolling over for abuse. Being a servant is not, well, I won't speak up against what's wrong because I just have to be a servant. You know what I mean? Like, being a servant is not abandoning justice. Being a servant is not abandoning righteousness. Being a servant is not any of that. It's not a loss of personality. Being a servant it's really that dying to self. It's that dying to ego, dying to, you and I come together for a gathering on a Sunday morning, and I'm like, I only want to do songs with the electric guitar and drums. I don't want any hymns. I don't want any piano. You know what I mean? Like, and I want it to be high energy, high volume, like crazy fast speed. That's the only style. Like, that's my favorite style of music.
Yeah.
Being a servant says, all right, that's what I like best. But this isn't about me and what I like best. So I can fully appreciate and enjoy and engage in other styles.
Yeah.
Because I know it's not about me.
Yeah.
And I will not insist on getting my own way.
Good.
That's in the passage on love, right?
Yeah.
Love does not insist on getting its own way.
Does not insist on its own way. Yeah.
Right? So it's not even okay, fine, we have to sing some slow songs. I'll just stand here and chew my gum and look at the ceiling until we get back to the fast songs. No, you're still insisting on getting your own way. Because it's if we won't do it my way, then I just won't participate, right?
Yeah.
That's what being a servant is. Being a servant is dying to self. It's not insisting on my way or the highway, basically, to use a colloquial phrase. Being a servant is, you know what? We need help in the kids' wing. I worked 40 hours this week. So did 90% of the people in this room. And even the people who are retired, they're still busy watching their grandkids. They're busy serving at the church, mowing the lawn. You know what I mean? Like, being a servant is recognizing, everyone has reasons why they could say no to the labor behind the scenes. Everyone has reasons why they could say, well, somebody else needs to do that. Being a servant says, all right, I'll do that. I'm willing to do that. You know, like, all right.
Yeah.
I'll pick up trash.
Yeah.
All right. I'll get here early and stand at the door and greet people.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'd like to sleep in, but I'm sure everyone else would. So I'll wake up 15 minutes early so I can be at the door and say hi to everybody.
Yeah.
And you can sleep in. You know what I mean? Like, because here's the thing, right? If we're all approaching it with that mindset, see, the reason we're so afraid of being the servant is because we collectively have failed at this. And I use that word very deliberately. Like, we collectively have failed at this as the American church. And so everybody knows that if you're the person to volunteer to help, you're going to get dumped on and you're going to have to do an unfair amount of work.
Yeah.
Why?
Oh, yep.
Because of the 80-20 rule.
Yep.
I mean, this is literally, you go to anybody and you say the 80-20 rule, especially in business. In business, it has a straight up, it's called the Pareto principle. Like, this guy studied it across companies, across the nation, across the world, and was like, 20% of people do 80% of the work, right? Like, that's an indication that we have all failed at this. So we are afraid to be the servant because we know we're going to get just abused in that role.
Yep.
If we would all wake up and take a mature approach to it, a holy approach to it, if all of us would say, yeah, you know what, I'll work in the kids' wing so that you can be in the service, singing along and listening to the sermon and worshiping with your, brothers and sisters, let me be in the kids' wing. If we would all do that, well, you don't have to be in the kids' wing once a year. I mean, seriously, think about it, right? Like, we don't need 300 volunteers in the kids' wing.
Yeah.
So if we have a church of 90, 100 adults, 52 weeks a year, we need let's say maybe 10. So it's not literally one, for a church our size,
Yeah.
right? But instead of saying like, okay, when was the last time I was in the service? 3 months ago. If we would all say, no, let me take a turn in the kids wing, you'd only have to be back there like 4 times a year. So the majority of your time would be in the service with everyone else.
Yeah.
Because we all chose to serve.
Yeah.
But the reason we're afraid to serve is because we have all failed at serving.
Yeah, and it doesn't rob you from who God has created you, but it puts you as who God has created you in Christ. Because now you are not an individual separated from God in relationship. You are in Christ, and that your identity is fulfilled and everything. So I think it's good. Yeah, vessels and servants.
Yep.
It's
It's good stuff.
good stuff.
All right. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, we'll see you Sunday.
Hey everyone, Pastor Sam here. Thanks for joining us for another midweek Bible study video. If you didn't see the sermon that we were talking about, you can find it here. Or if you're interested in more of these midweek Bible study videos and thoughts as Pastor Mario and I break things down, you can find that here as well. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date on all our content. Thanks for joining us.